Hello everyone, once again it's Adam, and let's get down with another episode of Hitler History. Today we'll be continuing from Adolf's time in Linz to his years in Vienna, and look at what he was doing, thinking, and who he was meeting in his time there, as well as important influences on him and his future worldview, an exposition to influences that would shape his thinking. Essentially, Vienna for Adolf would be an important turning point in that he would be introduced and exposed to, but not adopt at this stage, his future prejudices and phobias, helping later to form his overall worldview. Now let's continue from where we left off when we last spoke of Adolf in Linz. When we last saw Adolf, it was 1907, and he had left for Vienna to pursue his art career. This happening in September of 1907 to be exact, wholly believing in himself to ace his exam and become a great artist of his time. And here he was, finally in the city where his dreams would supposedly come true, to take a test that would propel him to artistic stardom. He had plenty of money as well, being given a loan of 924 kronen as a gift from his Aunt Johanna, comparable to a whole year's salary to get into his new career. In the city of his dreams, he moved into a small second-story apartment at 31 Stumpergasse. Armed with his outsized ego, cash from family, and art he had made prior, he would go to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts in October 1907 to take the entrance exam he thought he was going to blow right through and just get accepted with open arms into a highly prestigious art academy. The exam he was to take consisted of two parts. The first part being an assessment of work submitted by applicants by a panel of professors, and the second part requiring candidates to make works based on certain themes in a span of 6 hours. Adolf managed to pass the first part on the assessment of work, but failed the second part on the grounds that he didn't include enough focus on the human form. Test drawing unsatisfactory, few heads, being the exact words for the reasoning behind his rejection. Overall, Adolf's style was too old-fashioned for the school. The assessors noticed Adolf's penchant for buildings in his paintings and encouraged him to try his luck at architecture, but because he never properly finished his schooling, and thus didn't have the proper credits to do so. This failure hit Adolf hard. He wasn't prepared to admit or face such defeat, and thus didn't tell anybody he knew of his initial failure to join the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. And this failure in October would be met with something even worse for Adolf by December that year. As the end of the year drew closer, Clara's cancer had progressed to its final stage and her end was not far off. So in December, Adolf returned home to Linz to be with his mother before her passing, which came on the 21st of that same month. With his mother gone and the sting of his rejection still apparent, these events equated to a serious double blow now that his ideal image of an effortless climb to artistic fame had been seriously damaged. After Clara's death, Adolf's younger sister Paula, aged 12 at this time, was given to the care of Adolf's older half-sister Angela and her husband Leo Rabel. And with Clara's passing, both Adolf and Paula split Clara's estate of 2,000 krone, each receiving 1,000 krone. With this new sum of cash, Adolf still had money left over from Johanna's gift of 924 krone and a monthly orphan's pension of 25 krone a month, so for the time being, Adolf was rather well off financially to live as he pleased in Vienna. It wouldn't be until early February 1908 that Adolf would return to Vienna, going back to his small second-story apartment from when he first arrived in September at 31 Stumpergasse. Later that same month, Adolf's friend August would join him from Linz after, as mentioned previously, Adolf had managed to convince August's parents to let their son pursue a career in music at the Vienna Conservatory. After August had moved in, they would room together in a slightly larger room at the same address. Around this time, August would be accepted into the Vienna Conservatory, and would spend his days studying in the apartment with a rented piano that took up much of the space in their home. And much the same as his time in Linz, that is, Adolf didn't do much of anything productive in his time in Vienna, with the same routine of sleeping in late, reading literature to confirm his own opinions and not adapt them, sketching, orations to August about anything that struck a nerve with him, architecture study, attending the opera, with Wagner being an ultimate favorite of his, and wandering with August late into the night to appreciate or condemn the architecture of the Habsburg capital. As time went on in their rooming, Adolf would grow annoyed at August's piano practicing, which would break out into an argument where Adolf would reveal to August of his failure to join the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, illustrating that Adolf had no idea what his future held. Noticed and recalled by August was Adolf's quickness to anger, drastically enhanced by his rejection and lowered self-confidence, able to flip out at the turn of a dime over even minor things. Overall, his rejection damaged his ego to a point where he thought the world was turned against him, and even actively conspiring towards his failure, being a person that seriously wanted approval in the face of his own mediocrity and failure. Also in their time in Vienna, August also recalled Adolf's being prone to coming up with grandiose plans on a whim, whether it be for personal success or the benefit of others, that all led nowhere and fell victim to Adolf's own laziness. Such plans included the writing of a drama, housing complexes, a drink to replace alcohol, and a traveling orchestra. While the two lived together, both abstained from women, both Adolf and August having their reasons, both being rather awkward when it came to people of the opposite gender, with Adolf being to some extent misogynist towards women based on his Schoenauer beliefs. And with what money they had, they lived very frugally to an extent, especially when it came to their meals, but not so much for visiting the opera, being frequent patrons. Since neither of the two had any jobs, such living was necessary to live comfortably as they did. In August of 1908, with his first semester of the conservatory over, August would travel back to Linz to spend time with his parents and return by November. With Adolf now alone, he set his sights on giving the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts a second shot, although he did nothing to improve his chances of getting accepted, literally nothing, still going by his supreme confidence and still larger-than-life ego. But before he was to try his luck once more at the academy, he would visit family back in the Waldviertel to possibly try and squeeze some more money from his relatives like Aunt Johanna, but would return to Vienna soon afterward. Once he had returned, he waited until October to take the exam again, still not doing any studying or advancing himself in any way, and without even a proper backup plan. He fell face first in his second attempt, not even getting past the first part of the exam. Already as before, his confidence had failed him, and he became angry and frustrated at his failure. With his shame came the prospect of having to reveal to August a second time of his defeat. So without telling anybody, including August, he quietly moved out of Stumpagasse 31, and at this point things were to go downhill fast for young Adolf. From Stumpagasse 31, Adolf moved into a smaller apartment at 22 Felbestrasse in room 16. And in the 9 months that he would live there, we're not exactly sure what he did in his time living here, since there were no witnesses to his time here. Since we don't know much of what Adolf did in these 9 months, we can assume it was much the same as in Stumpagasse, if not him living even more frugally than before. And from here we can dabble a little in some of Adolf's main influences at this time and before, with the first major influence being that of Georg Ritter von Schoenauer, the pan-Germanist whose movement had all but died by the time Adolf had moved to Vienna. But Schoenauer's fervent German nationalism, anti-liberalism, anti-socialist, anti-Catholic, anti-Semitism, and misogyny were to make a mark on Adolf in his years after Vienna and entry into politics, with Adolf mainly being attracted to Schoenauer's principles of German nationalism. Schoenauer's personal use of the title Führer, and the use of the Heil greeting, shows that Adolf more than likely took influence from Schoenauer's movement. Adolf's hatred for the Social Democrats can find its roots in his time in Vienna. The Social Democrats, with their equality, labor rights, unionization, universal suffrage, and anti-nationalism, were opposite of Schoenauer's and Hitler's beliefs, and thus occurred Adolf's dislike in this time and for his whole life. The second major influence for Adolf would be Vienna's mayor for the first 2 years of Adolf's stay in Vienna, that of Karl Lueger. Adolf happened to be attracted to Lueger's presentation of politics. Lueger appealed to the mostly German-speaking lower-middle-class masses, and like Schoenauer was an anti-Semite, but more pragmatic, relating to politics and economics as a veiled attack on capitalism and liberalism, than Schoenauer's racial anti-Semitism, than ideological or racial one at that, scapegoating the Jews to gain populist support. Vitriolic anti-Semitism exhibited by both Schoenauer and Lueger would be the proper introduction of anti-Semitism for Adolf. Also, Lueger's control of his masses to attain his purposes, and use of propaganda, and gains to be made by popularizing hatred against Jews, would be things that Adolf would manage to do himself once he came to power. And it didn't help that since the politics of Vienna were so fractured due to the different interests of the many ethnicities that Vienna and the empire itself were comprised of, that Adolf would come to despise parliamentarism and thus implement his hate for it into his rhetoric. Continuing on the melting pot that was Vienna at this time, it accentuated Adolf's prejudiced views on the mixture of cultures in the city and empire as a whole, with his devout nationalism helping in his animosity for the blend of culture with what he believed to be degrading his own German-speaking culture. During this time, Vienna was a hotbed of anti-Semitism, one of the most anti-Semitic in Europe at that, and as such, literature, conspiracy theories, and open anti-Semitism were common in the city, and one could find literature putting the Jews at fault for any and every inconvenience, and stating them to be inferior and a whole race of their own. Another possible influence for Adolf in terms of his exposure to anti-Semitism was the magazine Ostera, a Volkish magazine that preached of the struggle of Aryans against inferior subhumans, along with racial theory and to a lesser degree anti-Semitism. There is a chance that Adolf read this garbage and later took notes from the man who created the magazine, Lanz von Liebenfels. Going on, after his stay at 22 Faberstrasse, Adolf left the apartment in mid-August 1909 for an even smaller room at Sechshausenstrasse 58, living there for barely a month and slipping out on September 16, 1909, without paying his rent, straight into the hardest part of his life so far, a life of poverty, destitution, and misery. At this point, Adolf had hit his lowest point. No home and almost no money. Adolf had truly sunk and was practically groveling in the dirt. Before the winter set in, he was sleeping in the open on benches, and reduced to almost nothing in this derelict state. He truly was a sad man.
You are so sad.
And as the winter set in, he found a lodging in a homeless shelter, which provided basic necessities in the night, but attendants would have to go their own way in the daytime until night came once again. It would be in the homeless shelter that Adolf would meet and make acquaintance with another lodger named Reinhold Hanisch, who would become a business associate and help Adolf make money by selling the paintings that Adolf made. Things would get slightly better for Adolf, who, along with Reinhold, would move to a men's home in the north part of Vienna in February 1910, being better than the homeless shelter in that it provided living space and more private quarters, and provided a kitchen, washrooms, laundry, library, reading room, and workroom. The workroom being where Adolf and Reinhold did their business. With this business, Adolf would paint his artwork in the form of watercolors. Then Reinhold would sell them to bars and frame makers. In this business, they regularly made deals with Jews. And according to Reinhold, Adolf claimed that Jews were better customers than Christians. Adolf even had another partner named Joseph Newman whom he sold his paintings to that happened to be Jewish. So Adolf couldn't have been an anti-Semite in Vienna as he had claimed in Mein Kampf. When it came to the making of paintings, Adolf was, no surprise, lazy in doing so and had to be pestered by Reinhold to make more, who sold more paintings than Adolf could make, which was about one a day. As Adolf worked on his paintings in the workroom, politics were a common topic to be discussed, which Adolf was keen to take part in, where he would attack the Social Democrats he hated so much and praise components of Schoner and Luger's principles. He would also lecture on the greatness of Wagner and Vienna architecture, but in his rantings he wasn't heard to have said anything negative on the subject of Jews. Adolf in fact praised the Jews on a number of subjects: resistance to persecution, first civilized nation to be monotheistic, dismissing blood libel, and praising Jewish musicians. It could be argued that Adolf was merely being pragmatic, and that he could swallow the fact that his sellers were Jewish as long as they helped him make a living, and that anti-Semitism was so common in Vienna at this time that any negative remarks made by Hitler on Jews could have been easily missed. But arguments like that at this point is speculation since not enough evidence has surfaced to support it. But Adolf was certainly exposed to anti-Semitism in Vienna, but his anti-Semitism had to fully develop after the Great War and the Revolution, a simple rationalization rather than full worldview. By the summer of 1910, Reinhold became irritated by Adolf's inability to keep up with orders, and accused him of painting only when necessary. But Adolf retorted saying he needed to be in the right mood to paint. Things came to a head when Adolf accused Reinhold of withholding money from him, 59 kronen to be exact, which went to the police, and Reinhold was sentenced to only a few days in jail. But since Reinhold went under an assumed name, that of Fritz Walter, Adolf never received his money. After this incident, Reinhold wouldn't see Adolf ever again, and thus not much is known about Adolf's doings from the latter half of 1910 to 1913. In this time, he still lived in the men's dormitory, doing his usual hanging out in the workroom, discussing politics, and lecturing on his favorite subjects. Still living frugally, but kept clean and dressed neatly, albeit his shabby living quarters, confirmed from others that lived in the men's dormitory. Near the very end of his stay at the men's dormitory, in early May 1913, Adolf finally received his father's inheritance, a sum of 820 krona, and with this new sum of money, Adolf left the city later that same month on May 24th, 1913, bound for Munich, to escape from the city he now hated so much, possibly to take a shot at the art academy there, or to get away from responsibilities to his country that he had been putting off for 4 years by that time. And with Adolf's exit from Vienna, we conclude this episode. Summing it all up, we can see how confident Adolf had been with himself and his success, only to be shot down and be dragged through the mud that was the unforgiving reality of Vienna. Personal characteristics such as his now well-known self-confidence, quickness to anger, laziness, and oratory are very well seen here, and we took a look at the people and ideas he first encountered here that would later help shape his politics and worldview, with Schoner's German nationalism and Luger's practice of politics, along with Adolf's hatred of social democrats, parliamentarism, growing animosity to different cultures, and the possibility of his reading Osterer. As Adolf himself later declared in Mein Kampf, his years in Vienna made him hard, and these years certainly helped in forming his character and ideas that would later influence his politics. In the next episode, we look at Adolf's first time in Munich for the 15 months he lived there just before the Great War. This has been Adam of Hitler History, hoping to see you again for the next episode. Hitler in Munich.
Es braust unser Panzer im Sturm finster